Digital Influx are a London-based edtech company. We're offering a 12-part course for 8 to 11-year-olds to learn the basics of user experience principles and design thinking. Programs relating to STEM are important, as children should be taught how to think, not what to think. The course aims to develop their problem-solving, teamwork, and critical thinking skills, among many more. Each lesson will have short videos and games to make sure your experience is fun and memorable and fits with your own learning style. And it improves soft skills by using real-life practical examples to improve empathy. To learn more, please visit digitalinflux.com.
I do think that where we are now is a much better place than what the industry was like years ago. In 2014, I was at a tech company of almost 100 employees, and I am not exaggerating when I say that I only remember there being 4 other female colleagues at the time. 2 of those were girls that were working at the front desk to greet people. And this is probably one of the more extreme, I hope, and yeah, we're one of the more extreme and rare examples, but it was still a real experience that I went through. And fast forward to today, I'm working at a software company where one of their main core values is representation. And I would say that about 30% of the company identify as females, which is the highest percentage of females in any company I worked at previously. 2 of them are founders. And I think from 2 of the founders are females. And I think gender equality in the workplace was something that was, you know, a core value that they wanted and not something that they had experienced previously. And a lot of other females working in leadership roles at Pitch as well. So for me, this was very refreshing to see, especially when comparing this company to the one I previously described. I noticed that I'm more vocal and more comfortable at this company. And I think it's so important to have female role models at various levels and also in different areas of the company, because having these women in different roles makes it possible for me to envision myself in that position one day, and that there's a path for me that I can follow and that there are opportunities that exist for me. So it's been really cool to see also that a lot of mothers of young children also have these roles at my current company. You know, I think it helps that we work remotely and with flexible schedules. So it's been cool that we see that these women don't always have to choose between being a full-time caretaker or fully committing to their jobs, and that it's possible to do both. And we've also seen really positive commentary from our male colleagues who are father figures, and they were saying that it also set them up to be more involved in their children's lives as well as share caretaking responsibilities with their partners. And I think the second part of the question was, what advice would we give to women hoping to reach leading roles, right? My advice would be, for women who want to reach leadership roles, maybe find companies whose values align with yours, and companies that encourage and guide women to leadership roles. So, and if you work at a company you love but does not yet offer that support, then I would please try to seek it within your design community. I think it's very important to have a support system where you have these discussions with and talk about your goals and help you find ways to achieve them. And I think there are always people who are willing to help. Just recently, I even reached out to Braun, who's also here today with us. I met her at another webinar that we were both part of, and I was asking her for advice on promoting inclusivity in the workplace. And she wrote me a really thoughtful response whose perspectives I can add to my own. And I think this is how we can continue to grow and help each other. And another thing that you can do is to seek opportunities online or in your area that can support you. I recently found out about two organizations that I think are fantastic. One is called ADP List, where you can connect with mentors around the world for a free one-time mentoring session about portfolio reviews or career advice or leadership. A second one I just found out about is called Womentor. And what they do is that it's a program that helps female designers in senior positions connect with female design leads to help empower and guide them into those roles. And the second of which I'm planning to apply for next year. So I think that's a really cool resource to have.
I agree a lot with what T's just said there. But to the first question, I think I certainly have experienced some struggles. I can't conclusively kind of attribute them to my gender. And obviously no one's outright said it's my gender that stopped me doing certain things. But definitely in my earlier career when I was in London, there was a short time when I really did feel like I couldn't catch a break. It didn't matter how hard I tried. I just constantly felt like I was kind of swimming against the current a bit. I sort of experienced everything from being called honey in the workplace, which is probably one of my most uncomfortable moments, to also being given a relatively inappropriate shoulder rub, to also being fired from a job with very little justification to why or how it happened. And so I've kind of definitely sort of over time kind of moved on from those, but feel like it's probably got something to do with the fact that it's easier potentially to do that to a woman than a man. I'd say kind of like T, I've kind of definitely got stronger over the last few years. I've started to find my confidence, become a little bit more stubborn, I suppose, and willing to kind of put my opinion forward without worrying too much about the consequence, which is great. Also, similarly, I work somewhere now where 50% of our staff are women. So we've really worked hard to make sure that we're equalizing and got a kind of good balance there. With regards to kind of women and reaching leading roles, I completely agree with T in the sense of you've got to find yourself a good mentor. And if you can't find yourself a good mentor, at least find a group of like-minded women. It's really hard to be what you can't see, and I know that firsthand. ADP List, which he's just talked about, I'm actually part of as a mentor as well there, but also on sort of universities often have ones as well that you can connect to. So if you're a younger female looking to connect to women in industry, a lot of the time you're university. So I also work with RMIT as a mentor to make sure that students and graduates can see that there are women in leadership. And I think that's really important to make sure that they can see right from the offset that it's available to them. So yeah.
And thanks for joining us today. So I'll start with kind of the struggles that I have. I think the main struggle I had was when I moved to Australia. I'm originally from Israel, and moving to a new country, English is not my first language. I studied American English, so Australian is a completely new language for me. And also the culture is very, very different. And don't get me wrong, I love Australia and I think the culture here is great. But it was really kind of a new experience for me. So coming from Israel after having many years of experience and then trying to put my foot in the door and finding a job and everything. I didn't know anyone here in Australia in the design community. So that was very challenging for me. So I don't think it's necessarily because of my gender. It's probably more because of my background and because of my culture. However, I did have other challenges in life, which I you know, like Bronwyn, I wouldn't call them like huge struggles, but I would say it was more challenges from people kind of telling me that, you know, maybe I'm not feminine enough, or why don't you wear dresses more? You don't put enough makeup, you don't act like a girl, and so on. And I took that really as kind of a challenge to show them that I can be who I am and I can be myself, and I don't need to be feminine because I'm a woman, and I can basically do whatever I want. I did experience some, I would say, very difficult question, you know, when kind of trying to going to job interviews or trying to approach, you know, a new market or a new industry, when people were asking me questions like, so when are you going to have kids? Which is completely inappropriate to ask, and also assuming that I'm going to have kids and not asking me, well, they shouldn't ask me anyway, right? I don't know a lot of men that have been asked, when are you going to have kids? Because maybe, you know, won't be able to be here for a very long time. So I said that's really none of your business, to be honest. And I can say also that I don't want to have kids. So I don't have kids, and I've been judged by many, many people that as a woman, why don't you have kids? But I'm also the type of person that really trying to prove myself, not to others necessarily, but probably for myself. So I take things as challenges, and I say, you know what? I'll show you, and I'll show myself that I can do it. And I think this is what kind of, you know, drove me to learn a lot, to learn about the industry, to build my community in LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is not really something that has been used a lot in Israel. I literally joined LinkedIn when I moved to Australia, and reach out to people to, you know, to build those connections, to learn how they can potentially help me, but also to give them something in return. And I think this is really a key of, and this is the advice that I will give women as well, is first of all, know who you are. You're not here to make anyone else's happy. You need to make yourself happy. So first of all, think about, who do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to grow? And go and do that. Like, achieve what you're trying to achieve for yourself. If you want to be in a leadership role, go and be in a leadership role. Like, do whatever you need to do to get you there. And I think, like Tim Bronwyn said before, find yourself a mentor, or find yourself a sponsor, or find yourself someone. I also joined the ADP list. I'm also a mentor. I especially work with the young women or women that just joined the UX community. And the main thing that I'm telling them is really, where do you want to be? And put yourself out there. Take risks, you know, step out of your comfort zone, write articles, approach people, ask them questions, give them something as well, show them how you can give them some value so they will give you something in return. So, you know, build kind of this influential relationship with people, so people will be in a position to also give you something back. And I think that a lot of the time I heard, you know, women finding it hard to, you know, to start a conversation maybe, or to ask for something, to ask for, you know, a pay rise, or to ask for a position, or to ask for a promotion, because they feel like, you know, they need to be, I would say, it's like, you know, subtle and polite, and they don't want to make other people feel angry or upset with them. And like I said before, it's really not about making people like you. That's what I would say. I don't have this need for people to think that I am, you know, the most awesome person in the world. I want people to respect what I do, because I worked really hard to achieve what I've achieved. And I think this is really a key there, that it's not about pleasing others, it's about pleasing myself, and being, you know, the best manager that I can be by enabling my employees to be better, to chase their, you know, what they need to do, to support them as much as I can, but also to really give them kind of the, you know, the boundaries, or set up the expectation of what I'm expecting them to do. So I think it's more about, you know, showing showing others, but mainly showing yourselves what you can do, and set up those goals and really chase them and find people that can help you. And there are many, many people, not just women, but men as well, that can help you get there.
The last person, because everyone has already said all the good things and I get to just fill in the gaps. I largely agree with everything that everyone has said so far and have shared a lot of those experiences as well. My experience in the tech industry, I've worked mainly with smaller teams and startups, and I think they are also very male dominated. I've pretty much always been almost the only woman, or maybe one of 2 or 3 women in a team that I've worked on, which has been like much worse when it's been highly technical teams. So my career actually started out as a developer and it transitioned into design, and I saw those problems like probably a lot worse when I was in an even more technical role. But even still, like as a designer, I do find similar problems. I haven't been called honey like Bronwyn has, but I was once referred to under a collective greeting of hello gentlemen, which I didn't love. And that kind of thing happens a lot where, you know, you look at a room where pretty much everyone's a man and you kind of don't spy that there's a woman there and then proceed to interact with everyone like they're like it's just one of the boys. And I think, you know, that stuff doesn't, you know, it's not like I was deeply upset by it, but I think, you know, over time, all of those things do build up and you do end up feeling like you don't belong. And I think this is partly what a few people have touched on here is just not seeing anyone like you and what impact that has had on your career. And I think for me, that's probably one of the things that I've struggled with, which is I went from, I mean, I certainly struggled to even see myself in the tech industry to start with, but then as I've progressed, the issue that I have now is really looking for senior women in leadership at the companies that I'm working at to support me, and that they are very few and far between. And it's been difficult for me to kind of find my mentor or find my advocate sometimes. And I think that's still a really big problem, at least in Australia. You know, there's still the majority of especially executives are definitely still men, and I do struggle, you know, to build the same kind of relationships and mentorship styles with men. And also I'm just not 100% sure whether I want to be mentored by them. Like I do really want a female or non-male role model, and that's a big challenge for me. I think one thing I want to touch on, just because the topic of this panel in terms of challenges is the specific challenge of women in leadership in design roles. And I think in the tech industry, design sometimes sits in this difficult spot between like not being technical enough and also not being business enough. And we kind of end up in this weird middle ground. And I think that's compounded sometimes by not being a man, and that you could, you know, sometimes it feels like you could potentially command more authority in those areas if you were a man or did present in a more masculine way. And I think that's definitely like a particular challenge of this area, but I also see it as a bit of an opportunity. But I think, you know, part of what's going on, what I see in tech companies that I've worked at, is there's almost like a rush to be like the most hardcore all the time. And that's almost like how people are rewarded in the workplace, like the most technical, like not just a developer, but like the most back end, like the most, you know, the least soft in many ways. And even in design, like there's a lot of respect is afforded to people who do like highly technical designs and UI design and the really like on the tools design. And I find that where the challenge is really campaigning for the things like research and conversation and empathy and change making and that behind the scenes, emotionally intelligent driven kind of work, where I have ended up specializing. So I think, you know, you definitely know quickly where, whether the organization you're in supports that and is open to it. And if it's not, you end up being kind of like a foreign agent, and you just like get all these kind of like antibodies, just like basically turn down all of that kind of energy that you put in. So I think, yeah, so in terms of like specific advice, I pretty much everything that I had written down here has been already covered. But I guess just related to that is, I think it's obvious to me, and it's obvious to everyone on this panel, that I think women do make good leaders, and what I call kind of non-patriarchal leadership is important, and is a pretty critical part of how we run businesses / the world in 2020. But I think it's not as common as you might think. And I think if you are going to be a leader as a woman, and you don't want to do it by just kind of like doing that standard kind of patriarchal, authoritative, top-down command and control leadership style, I think you should do it. And I think the way that you should do it is figure out what it is and what it means to you, and really deeply understand it, but then also see yourself as an educator, and really proving out to people what that is, and taking them along for that journey. Because for them, it might be something that they haven't actually, you know, like me, you know, or many of us, they may not have seen it before. They may be learning about it for the first time through you. And I think one of the best things that you can do as a leader or as an emerging leader is to really like embody that educator kind of mindset and take people with you, rather than just kind of expecting them to understand it at first blush. And I wish that we were past this, but for me, I feel like we're still at that education stage where to do this, you really are a change maker, and you really do have to bring people with you rather than just be in their face and be different, because it's new, and they need to come with you on that journey. Sure. So my answer to this is, I actually think, so I'm glad that you tagged me, because it kind of links on from what I was just saying. So I think the idea of like a mastermind of a design, I think, is a relic of this more patriarchal leadership style. And my answer to your question is, I don't think that single people are masterminds of design. And I think when we talk about modern design, and especially modern design perhaps driven by this different way of looking at the world, that I feel like is more embodied by like this stepping away from that patriarchal authoritative style. You do have to accept that design is collaborative, that it's to do with teamwork, and that design itself, when you really deeply understand it, is not just something that one person does. And so when I talk to especially executives and people who really like, they love people like Steve Jobs, and they're like, Steve Jobs did it this way, he was such an amazing designer. I think any designer who's kind of worth their salt knows that like Steve Jobs wasn't really a designer. Like Steve Jobs was an executive and he was a leader, but the design was constructed by a whole team of people, and has been iterated and worked on through many different versions. And I think one thing that I do, especially in my role as a product and design leader, is I promote that design is something that we do as a team, and it happens at multiple stages throughout the development of a product. And so there is, you know, when we think about design as like, you know, you make the UI design, that is just one slice of design, and it starts like a long time before then. It starts when you start talking to people, when you start managing stakeholders, when you start building research practice, and then it ends far after that as well, because that design is going to change and morph as it goes through iterations, through a technical team, and through the build process, and through feedback. So I think, yeah, my answer is, in terms of like, is there like a you know, a kind of female Steve Jobs equivalent that I can call to mind? I guess like I could go looking for design leaders to give you this answer, and there are people like Indy Young and various people who you can read their work, and I've got their books on my bookcase, but I just don't think that the answer here is to single out a single person and say that's like a design leader, because, or a design superstar, as you've kind of called it, because I just don't think that's how design really works.
I'm loving seeing all the lady name being like, yeah, these girls have owned it. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Millie. What she's just said is that the answer is no, I don't know any individual woman that's not being recognised, mainly because we don't recognise individuals anymore. I don't think. I completely agree. It's a collaborative effort throughout. You know, when on any project that we're working on now, there is a whole combination of people that work on it, all the way from, you know, researchers through to the development team and everyone in between. So you can't, I don't think you can assign just a single head to that. Saying that, I do find it interesting, and looking back on the women who have done some phenomenal things throughout time and just haven't received kind of the same accolades as men. And I wanted to bring up one woman who I quite like, mainly because I quite like, this is a bit of a hobby, but her name's Eva Zeisel. And she was a designer, but specifically focused on kind of the pottery world. And this is way back, this is like 40s, 50s. And she basically made pottery available to consumers super cheaply by making it mass produced and manufacturable. It's a huge thing that she did, and it was absolutely incredible. But you can only find out about her through a bit of research, or maybe stumbling against on her in a museum or something like that. So there are a lot of women who have been, who are amazing if you get the chance to research and look them up and see how that they contributed to the industry. One great book I would love to recommend is called, I've got it written down, Women Design. I've got it, I lied, I haven't, I'm not written down. I've got it right here. Women Design by Libby Sellers. And it's literally all about women in the design industry who have done some phenomenal things and potentially haven't got the stardom that they deserve because they were women. So I'd highly recommend that one. One of my favorite books on the shelf. One that I've actually read, unlike Millie's.
So I also agree with Millie and Bronwyn on, you know, we're no longer designing in silos. However, I do want to call out that, you know, the design industry is still very much led by men, right? So if you look at kind of the big, you know, the big guns of design, and you want to know, you know, the big names in the industry, you know, you hear about Don Norman, for example, really the grandfather, you know, of UX, and Jared Spool, and Tim Brown, or Tom Brown, you know, the guy from IDEO, and so on. And they're, you know, amazing people, but you don't hear so much about women that contribute a lot. And I actually Googled it after you sent us the question. I said, oh my God, I actually don't know a lot of women in this space. And I realized that a lot of people that are really, you know, that more known or famous is because they wrote a book. And maybe that's an issue as well, that the publishing companies are not necessarily promoting women that well. So I could talk about two women designers that kind of, I would say, not necessarily contribute to a big design, but more kind of to, you know, a workflow or a way of thinking and, you know, doing UX. So one of them is Jamie Levy, and I wonder how many people here heard about her. So she is an American designer, and she's absolutely amazing. And my friend and I actually brought her to Australia 2.5 years ago to run a workshop here. And she is great, but I don't think she's getting enough credit for what she does. And she's talking about UX strategy and how to really take the value of your research and come up with innovative ideas and so on. So she is one person. And another one is Donna Licho. Oh, she also wrote a book about storytelling and customer journeys. And And I think both of them are not known enough. So they do go to conferences and they talk and all of that, but I don't think they get the right promotion of what they've done compared to the men that are writing, you know, similar books, but for some reason they get more publicity than those women. And I think also if you look at, you know, Don Norman, for example, which I'm a big fan of, by the way, but Norman and Nielsen, they both kind of, you know, created this NNG group, you know, and they have a lot of followers and so on. But a lot of the workshops that they run are actually run by women, and I don't think those women get enough credit for the work that they do. So it seems like, you know, the guys are sometimes getting like carrying the name of themselves and putting it out there because, you know, it's Don Norman or it's IDEO by team and the other co-founder, which I don't remember his name, but at the end of the day, the majority of the work is being done by amazing women that we don't necessarily recognize. And that's probably something, or not probably, definitely something that we need to change.
So the first person that came to my mind when I read this question initially was this American woman named Elizabeth Magie. I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of her, but Magie was an American board game designer who created a game called the Landlords Game in 1903. A man saw that game. He saw that it was very popular amongst American university students, claimed it as his own, renamed it, and sold it as Monopoly. And today that's like one of the most popular board games, in the world. And despite the fact that Magie had a patent for it and she paid for a patent for it, the toy company Hasbro still credits the man who stole it from her as the original creator. And I know that's the realm of like board games, but you know, it's board game design is also design as well. But talking about the graphic design world, I agree with what everyone here has already said, that design is a group effort. You know, somebody researches, somebody does the UX testing, somebody does UX, somebody does visual design, somebody does the development. There's so many parts of it, and everybody contributes to it. And so I really love it when we're hiring and we're going through portfolios that the people who are applying are listing the credits for the project, because, you know, it really gives credit that other people were involved and it showed that they were working with other people and they're not claiming the entire thing as their own. And I really love seeing that in portfolios personally. And I know there are a lot of websites out there who try to make women in design more visible. Some of those are called Affirmation, Invisible in Australia, and Women in Graphic Design. And I will link those into the chat because people ask me about the resources for my other question. But basically they focus on highlighting female designers who have made enormous contributions to graphic design history to make them more prominent and known. So I would say if you're interested in discovering more about women in design, to check out those resources.
Yes, I did. My first job in Australia, actually. You know, during the salary reviews and all of that, I went to my colleague that was actually a bit less senior than me, and I asked him, how much do you earn? Obviously, we were not allowed to talk about salaries because people don't want you to know how much other people get. But I learned that he was getting more than me, and which I assume is the case. But the reason why I asked him is to see how much I should ask to get a pay rise. So I went to my manager and I asked him to increase my pay, and the answer that I got is, why do you need more money? You don't have kids and you have a husband that is working, which was unbelievably the most disrespectful answer that I can get from someone. So I told him, look, it's actually none of your business, and I want to get more because this is what I deserve. So I also went to HR and talked to them about it, but I really didn't get anything in return. And then I said, so basically you're telling me that I'm getting paid less just because I'm a woman. And they said, no, of course not. You can't say that. I was like, but this is the reality. Can you give me a different reason why I'm getting less than my male colleague, which again, I'm a little bit more senior than him. So no, I didn't really get a proper answer to that, which kind of just highlighted the fact that, yes, definitely I'm right. And I am getting paid less just because I'm a woman and just because they can, basically. But at the end of the day, I decided to leave this place because it wasn't a place for me, and for other reasons as well. But I think this is completely disrespectful, and also telling people you cannot talk about your salaries and then blaming those people for talking about the salaries just because the company is paying people differently is not okay. And for your question, what do we need to do? I would say, first of all, it should be illegal to pay women less. That's it, right? Not just women. It should be illegal to pay people from different backgrounds or different gender or different race or different whatever differently. So the company should have a strategy of, you know, how much are you paying for each one of those roles? And depends on the experience and depends on the value that you are providing to the company. This is how much you should get. It's not about, you know, in general, I would say, I don't know if it's true or not, but a lot of research has shown that, and a lot of people are talking about that women are less likely to ask for a promotion. I think the reason is not because we don't think we deserve it. I think the reason is because we're trying to, you know, to please people and not to make any troubles, because usually society will look at women differently, and women should please everyone, should smile and should be pretty and should speak less. Obviously it's not like that all over the world, but I think overall women grow up with this feeling that they shouldn't you know, ask for more when guys usually don't have the problem. So also hearing from companies, oh, he's getting more because he asked for more. Again, it's not okay. The company should take the responsibility to pay people how much they're worth, again, because of the value that they bring to the job, and not because of who they are, and also not because how much they asked. You know, I moved to Australia. I had like zero idea on how much I worth when moving to Australia. And I was also willing not to get a lot of money just because I needed, you know, I needed a job basically. But then when kind of I proved myself and I show my worth and you know, I had a few years of experience, it's like, okay, it's time for me to actually get what I deserve. And hearing that from, you know, from people is again, it's really not okay. And I think this is a big problem that we really need to fix. So I would say, yes, first of all, the Australian government should make it illegal to pay women less, and that's it. Like, this is done. And then we shouldn't have this problem with company, you know, making the effort to actually change their policy. And I think, like, there are some Scandinavian countries. I think this is probably the only place when it's, but I'm honestly not sure, that it's illegal to pay women less. Great, that's a great example. Let's follow it, let's do it, and just leave all those, you know, wage gaps behind us, because, you know, we're in 2020. So I would say it's about time.
I think it's a bit of a tricky question currently. I think I definitely have been, but I've mostly worked for smaller companies, and similar to what Lital was saying is that salaries are not something that's sort of openly spoken about. It's not when we kind of have conversations around and everyone kind of keeps it hush hush and it feels a bit kind of rude. I don't really know why, but we don't talk about it. But the reason I kind of say yes is because in general, women ask for less, and 9 times out of 10, that means they're getting less. they don't consciously ask for less. They just, I think we just have lower expectations of what we deserve or what we should get. And kind of a bit of an example of this is some research around the fact that if a woman asks for a pay bracket between here and here, they tend to expect that they're going to get that lower amount, and most of the time they do. Men, on the other hand, actually probably should be here and here, but they ask for here and here, and they're still expecting here. And they'll often get it. And so we're often starting on a very different level, which is pretty tricky. There's obviously a couple of ways that we can kind of get rid of that. The first is, as a woman, if you are thinking about here and here, let's make that your lower bracket and start to ask for the next stage up. The other is, if you're an employer, obviously starting to go to that higher bracket anyway. You're going to start to close that pay gap by naturally leaning into that higher pay bracket. That's just one thing with regards to that. But I think the overall thing that's a lot easier for larger companies to do, because there's lots of similar roles at kind of the same levels, is to basically assign salary to a role and its responsibilities. Not a person and what they can do, the role itself. So if you have a senior role, then that senior role should kind of receive the same pay grade across, and then potentially the next level up and the next level up. And so you know always where you're working towards, and it literally does not matter what gender you are, what race you are, you're always working to that same role and responsibility. I do understand that that is harder for smaller companies where potentially someone coming on probably takes on 3 or 4 different responsibilities, and that person just can't be kind of copycatted across the company. So it gets a little bit more trickier there. But I think there's a couple of methods that are kind of quick solutions to where we're at now, while the government gets to speed and bans and makes it illegal to pay women unequally. Yeah.
Yes, so someone actually asked this in the chat, but I would echo what Lital and Bronwyn have both said. I do think the fact that people don't openly talk about how much they're earning is one of the biggest issues here. And so is it taboo? Like, yes, I think it is pretty taboo, at least in Australian culture, to talk about what you're earning. And I would encourage people to not just say, let's make it less taboo, but actually like put yourself out there and be vulnerable and be the person who does talk about that number to the other people in your organization and in your peer circle. And I think, you know, you may find that you earn a lot more or a lot less than other people, and it may be a difficult conversation to have, but actually doing that is the action that you can take here. I think from an organizational level, yeah, echoing something that Bronwyn said, more transparent pay structures is really important. So making it clear to people what the next level up looks like and what they need to do to get there, rather than making it this very ambiguous, like, how do I win the favor of the boss kind of strange game that we play. I think that is a modern and progressive way about thinking about wage fairness. And I agree that within smaller organizations it can be difficult, but it's not impossible. And it is something that you can do to improve equality within your company, but also to make it more desirable to work at your company by showing that you have that commitment to transparency. I think the thing underneath that is really, so there's the thing that Bronwyn said about expectations of salary. And then something that Lital touched on as well about conversations with your boss. One thing that women are typically not as good at as men in this situation is negotiation. And I think this is a huge problem. I think women need to basically I would recommend doing negotiation training, like learn how to do it properly. And this is a business skill that will not just be about your salary, this will be about negotiating with stakeholders on projects. It's something that is really critical. I think, yes, culturally, women probably don't learn these skills in the same way, whether that's because they don't have the same kind of mentors when they're younger or they aren't exposed to the same role models. But I think, yeah, it definitely is something that's ingrained with the way that we socialize young girls, that they don't learn to negotiate as much. And that they typically do kind of take what they're given or are told that that is like the way that a good girl would behave. So I think, yeah, you know, learn how to do it properly, and learn from your peers who are good at it as well, and get tips from them. The other thing that I would just point to here is the pay gap. So in terms of like my experiences, I think I would say I don't know, because I'm just not, I don't think I've compared notes with people, and personally I don't think there's been a specific thing that I could point to. But I would say that one thing that I know is really critical in terms of bringing that pay gap down is just the fact that women can't often take on the same full-time hours and from office hours as men, especially if they are full-time carers of their dependents. And I think for a big part of the pay gap is, aside from the obvious discrimination, which I'm not going to dismiss, is that like women often don't end up taking on as senior roles because those senior roles are gate-kept as full-time roles, and they like possibly can't take on the same kind of responsibilities due to their need for flexibility. So I think that is not something that we, especially now, like I'm taking this call from my living room, you know, we know that we can work more flexibly. I think that organizations have essentially like a requirement to allow people to progress into leadership roles and higher paying roles with more flexible arrangements, whether that's different hours, job sharing, work from home, all of that kind of thing. And there's a pretty direct link between more flexibility in the way that we structure jobs and pay. And I think that's a big part of closing that gap as well.
I'm not sure if I personally experienced any inequality regarding wage, but I'm sure I have, and I definitely believe it exists. As everyone else said, I think it's one of those topics that is hard to bring up casually, kind of like asking about someone's weight, you know? I also think people don't like to talk about it because they don't want to be associated with their pay or have pre-biases of, you know, what makes you so special if you earn that much, or you must not be that skilled if you're receiving that kind of pay. I remember having a conversation with a woman who's in a business sector who told me that there's definitely a gender pay gap there. And she mentioned that during her interview, they asked what she wanted to get paid. They kept counter offering, and she also demanded extra benefits as well as a signing bonus. And when they had notified to tell her that she was hired, her manager personally congratulated her and told her that he was impressed because she was the first woman to ask for the extra benefits and a signing bonus, while most male interviewees tend to do that normally. And I think that goes back to what Millie mentioned about the negotiating. I think, yeah, it really reflects true in this personal experience that I heard from this woman. And I just found it so surprising and wondered if if the reason that women do get paid less is because they're also afraid to ask for more without sounding demanding or having a higher expectation on work. And I've also done a bit of online research about pay inequality. Hired.com does annual reports for the last 4 years. I'm not sure if anyone's seen them, but I checked for the year 2020, and it said that 63% of the time, men are offered higher salaries than women for the same job title in the same company. And in 2019, that percentage was actually lower at 60%. So it's not getting better, apparently, according to these reports. And also in the report, women also reported that negotiating for a higher wage was more stressful than getting a root canal, planning a wedding, and public speaking. I think one way to abolish this pay gap is, what others have said already, is to be transparent about our pay. I would personally be interested in having transparent salaries within the company I work for because I think it could build trust within teams. A company that I know that does this is called Buffer. It's a fully remote company that builds social media tools. And what they do is that they create base salaries for various roles and levels. They make it public. And they also have a cost of living multiplier because their team is remote. So everybody's living in different parts of the world with different costs of living. And yeah, that makes sure that all teammates around the world are being compensated fairly and adjusted to their city's cost of living. And they also put every employee's location and salary in a public Google file that people, even like you and me, can access and view. And I thought that was really interesting, and it makes upper management accountable for fair and unbiased pay. How do you break the lack of transparency in salary brackets so we women know what we should be asking for? And I don't know if the way I did it was correct, but there are a ton of surveys online, and what people are doing is that they're contributing to these Google Sheets. People are writing the gender that they identify as, their location, their seniority, and their brackets, and it's all organized. And you can kind of see, yeah, what people are getting paid from there. It's open publicly. I'll try to find the links and link that so you guys can see it.
So I'm going to say definitely, but I'm not going to go into kind of one specific example from myself. I think it's worth noting that this happens everywhere. Every woman experiences struggles getting opportunities, and that's simply because we're presented fewer opportunities to step into leadership or seniority. And when we do get there, we're given a harder time. We face there's lots of biases that I can talk about, but one of them that we face that I've looked into quite a bit is the prove it again bias. And it's just basically where women, once they are given that opportunity, they have to present themselves capable to do this task multiple times before they're considered genuinely capable and given that as a full responsibility from there on out. Men tend to only have to prove it once, and then they're kind of given the responsibility from there on out. So I think that's just one example of where, you know, we are presented less opportunities, and when we are given them, we're given a harder time. And it's just a bias, which kind of what I wanted to talk about more was, rather than, you know, obviously we should be picking up around derogatory language and dehumanizing language. That should be a given. But what we need more training in and more support in is helping with biases and understanding our biases and what we're doing, and making sure that we're trained in a way that means that we can be inclusive and we are aware of our behaviors. How on earth are we going to expect people to change if we make rules but they don't understand why the rules are there in the first place? So that's kind of more what I think we should be spending our time in rather than maybe at this moment sort of looking too much into what they're saying is why they're saying it.
Yeah, just rereading your question. Have I experienced any struggles in my career purely based on my gender? Yeah, I think Bronwyn said this earlier. It's very hard to know whether it was my gender or whether it was my age or whether it was like how technical I was or like what it was that tripped me up in this situation. But I do think that it does factor in some way to a lot of the challenges that I've faced. I think I you know, have a particular problem in that I do present as quite young also. I think people surprised to find out that I'm like in my 30s and not, you know, a lot younger than what I look. And I think maybe this ties into the other part of your question at the end in terms of stricter codes of conduct for language and dress code. I think the thing that you mentioned there specifically is a code of conduct, and there is some value to making these kind of things explicit. So a code of conduct is you know, a public thing that is essentially like a code of record about what, you know, the norm of the behavior should be in a group. And I think It's something that has been established a lot more in conferences recently, and people are starting to do it a lot more. And the reason why they do it is not necessarily because, you know, it's the most effective thing you can do, but it is really important because it shows like from the leadership that this is something that is important to the company. So it helps to establish a norm. And so I think a code of conduct for behavior and what is derogatory and offensive and not allowed is important. And I think it would be really good to see a lot more of that done at companies. But I think equally important is to actually call things out when you see them, and to actually, you know, make sure that you address them with fast feedback in the moment, so people are aware that they've done something wrong, and with empathy, because I think sometimes some of this stuff is on purpose bad and some of it is like subconscious and by mistake, and you have to address both, but doing it in a way that people can actually learn from that mistake. In terms of dress code, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but it is something that has been on my mind recently, because obviously it's extra weird to be like wearing corporate gear like in your home. And I think, you know, I was even thinking about what do I wear for, you know, for this panel, and it's like, I think, you know, the COVID pandemic has really put a new spin on our expectations of how people present for work, and what, you know, good work dress code is, because, you know, not only can you just turn off your video camera, but you can do your job just as well wearing a hoodie as you can wearing a, you know, a dress jacket. So I think the one thing that we certainly have learned is that no one needs to be wearing heels to work at the moment, which is amazing for everyone involved. But I think in general, like, it should teach us a lesson that like what you're wearing isn't really how you do your job, and it really has nothing to do with that. And if I want to come to work wearing a tracksuit, or if I want to come to work wearing like a dress suit, I'm still going to be as effective either way. So whether we need a code of conduct there, I'm not sure. Whether we just need to demonstrate as leaders and as, you know, people of influence that, you know, there are ways to be respectable and totally workplace friendly without necessarily, you know, dressing in ways that are inappropriate or even like, you know, I would go to the level of oppressive. I think that that's probably the best that we can do there. I'm not sure exactly what I would put in a code of conduct about dress code, other than wear clothes and be professional, and other than that, it's up to you, basically.
Experience negative events based on my gender beginning in higher education already. I was studying industrial design in university, which was and still is heavily male dominant, more so than the tech industry, I think. And I remember taking a technical drawing course. I had a male professor who I felt was a little bit sexist based off of my own assumptions, which at the time I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or not. But it became more clear when one day I allowed a good male friend of mine to copy one of my assignments so he could have something to turn in. And he literally took a piece of paper, placed it on top of mine, and traced the drawing exactly as it was. And when we had our assignments returned, my friend had received a much higher grade than me. So I decided to test my suspicions further. And on the next assignment, I traced an exact copy of the professor's example that he drew himself and turned that in. I still received a score like 75 out of 100. And at the end of the year, I remember reaching out to the only 4 other girls in the course and realized he barely gave any of us passing grades, while our male classmates had received much higher marks than us. And I think that's pretty ridiculous. In another company, I had someone in overhead call me a bitch. Sorry for the language, but he called me that in front of everyone present in the room. And in retrospect, the most disappointing part about that experience was not that he called me those words, but that I knew before looking out to see who he was stomping towards, that those words were directed towards me, because at the time I was the only female in that room. And I feel really sad at my younger self that I had that instant reaction of knowing that he was referring to me because of history's association of that word with females. And I did later received apology from that same man, and I continued to stay at the company, mostly because my visa was tied to that job, and quitting meant that I would have to leave the country within 7 days that I considered home at the time. And I continued to stay, even though that most of upper management were males. And I continued to stay, even though I kept witnessing some of my female colleagues receive sexual harassment. I remember one of our interns was, groped by a manager in front of a lot of people at a company party. And she tolerated it because she wanted to so badly stay at that company that was really well respected and well known in that country. And coming out of that situation, I just regret so much how those actions were normalized in that company, and more so disappointed in myself that I didn't stand up for myself more and also didn't stand up for others more. Thankfully, I haven't experienced anything like that since, and inclusivity and diversity are things that I seek out when I apply for jobs. Derogatory language shouldn't just be something that is discouraged in the workplace, but in life in general. And I think it's crazy that we're still talking about the wrongness in it and how it still exists today.
Wow, I have to say, T, I feel like bad for this experience, and that's completely wrong. I want to say also about something that I had experienced. It's not really relevant to the design industry. At the age of 18, I joined the Israeli Defense Force for 2 years, because in Israel it's compulsory to go to the military for both men and women, which is probably a good thing in that respect. However, at the time, which was more than 20 years ago, women were not allowed to be fighters. So yes, I did join the military, but which you can say, oh, that's great, really, very diverse by gender and so on. However, only men can go and actually fight, and the women most of the time will be, secretaries or things like that. I wanted to be a pilot. I couldn't. I was way too young to actually fight for it. Other women, amazing women, fought for it. So now women can be fighters and they can be pilots in the Israeli Defense Force and so on. However, I did want to add more value and to actually do something that matters. I just say, kind of on a side note, that I don't believe in wars, but as part of living in Israel, that's something that you do. So I end up being a weapon instructor and training people on basically how to shoot guns, mainly M16. And why I'm telling you that is because I think this experience really built my confidence. Because when you go to the military, you can't just say, no, I don't want to do it, or, I'll leave, I'll resign. You have to stay there. And if you say, I don't want to be here, you most likely will go to jail. So this kind of build, my confidence, but also really build my leadership skill at a very, very young age, because, I was there training people, 20, 30 people, mostly men. They are much bigger than me. I'm a very small person. And I had to deal with that. And I had to deal with this sexism and so on, which kind of end up, building this confidence in me and making me a bit, or way more, direct and open and honest. So when I faced those issues later in life and later in my career, I was in a position to actually respond and answer back. And I completely empathize with women that are not doing that, because it's so confronting when someone is telling you something super sexist and you don't know where that came up from. So what happened after I moved to Australia, and I told you this little story about my ex-manager that was an absolute idiot. He really mistreated women in the workplace. So he wanted everyone to like him. So he was kind of going after women, and we didn't have a lot of women back then, and was asking them for a cuddle, which was completely inappropriate. And one time I went to him and I told him, man, you have to stop doing that. You make those women feel really uncomfortable. He said, oh, but no one told me that. I said, of course they won't tell you that because they feel uncomfortable telling you that. So stop doing that. And I end up taking it to HR and telling them basically that I want to file a complaint against him, and what he's doing is wrong, and he shouldn't stay here. So he ended up losing his job because of that. So I'm actually very, very proud of doing that and speaking up for all those women that he basically sexually harassed on a daily basis. And because all of them were, very threatened, they didn't know how to deal with that. And also these companies are very kind of a boys club culture, and really end up a lot, most of those women end up leaving the company. And I'm not there for, a while now, but I think it became actually even worse because of that. And that's something that, companies really need to take into consideration and really do something about it. So also talking about kind of the code of conduct and what companies need to do. So I would say, yes, definitely, that's kind of a given. But I think companies need to do way more than that. So it's not just about making sure that there isn't any sexual harassment or in an inappropriate language. I think companies need to start thinking about the diversity strategy, basically, or the cultural strategy that they want to embed in the company. So where do you want to be? Where do you want to end up with? What is the outcome that you're trying to achieve in the workspace? How are you going to treat your employees? What kind of culture do you want to have here? And what are you going to do this year, next year, whatever time frame it is to actually build that? So it's not about, okay, let's have 50% women. It's about what are you trying to achieve from a diversity perspective? And then how can we hire the right people to get us there? So I'm a strong believer in hiring for cultural ed and not cultural fit. Because cultural fit, a lot of the time, people end up just hiring people that are really exactly like them, very similar to them, because it's like, yeah, we're all, you have the same culture, the same thinking, let's just get someone to think exactly like us. And that's not helping anyone. They might think it is, but it's really not. And companies showed over and over again that when you have more diversity in the company, and again, not just from gender, from background, from experience and things like that, you end up with way better results. So I think that's a key. Like, companies really need to start thinking about those things and implement those things. And I just want to add that, at PageUp, where I'm working now for the last 2 years, PageUp is actually doing that, and I'm very proud to be working there. And I'm very proud to say that, our senior leadership team have 40% women. Our board has 50% women. My team is very, very diverse because I took this action to make sure that I bring people from different backgrounds, different experiences. They can learn from each other. They can grow, help each other grow, help each other, learn new things and push themselves. So I would highly recommend for everyone that can impact that and can influence the decision-making in their businesses to start adopting that and to start thinking about it. It's not really just about the bottom line. It's about building the right culture to make your employees happy, which will, at the end of the day, impact your bottom line as well. So yes, I think empathy is key. I think, so you were talking about it at the beginning. Design thinking is something, I'm a huge fan of design thinking, like a huge fan. I actually had a few arguments lately with some people that think that design thinking is not the best tool in the world. I think just to touch it, very quickly, design thinking is really just a way for us to solve problem but it's all about, like, the most important component is about the empathy, it's about the discovery, it's about understanding what we're trying to achieve, it's about understanding other people and what they struggle with and what they need and so on. And I think a lot of companies are missing that. So yes, empathy is definitely a key. And I think the important thing about empathy is that, if it, working as a company and you want to increase your diversity, like I mentioned before, it's not just about saying, okay, now you need to hire a woman. It is important for us to understand the empathy of people that don't understand diversity. It's important for us because this is the only way we can change their behavior and their mindset. And it's really about the mindset. I think that a lot of people, because they're really used to working for the same company for many, many years maybe, or just seeing only male developers. So they don't really see the value of having a woman as a developer, maybe joining a team and adding something else. So I think it's really important to go through this exercise of, from a company perspective, understanding how people see the world, what do they think that a good team should look like, and then teaching them empathy so they can understand how different people in their team are thinking and what should they do to build a better team. And I think a team in a company, we talked about it, right? Design is not just a one person's role, it's a team's effort. So everything is a team's effort, and we need empathy to each other. I'm actually working now at PageUp with cross-functional team members, and cross-functional team means people from all across the business, from sales, from implementation, technical account managers, support, so on and so forth. And I kind of took this initiative, and lately in the last 2 or 3 months, I'm doing a lot of interviews with them. So I'm building really a pile of empathy towards them, because a lot of the things that they are experiencing, I didn't know about at all. I never heard about that. Understanding the gaps that they have, understanding the struggles that they have with, with designers or with product managers is really essential to build, a better company, a better culture in the company, and so on. And the second part of the question, do you feel empathy should be taught to children? I think you already proven it, by the way, with the photos that you showed us at the beginning. So I would say definitely yes, but I would say that's not enough. It's not just about empathy. It's also about equality. It's also about the fact that you're a boy doesn't mean that you need to like blue, or you need to be a builder or a police person, and police person, not a policeman, yes. You can also be a dancer if you want to, even though it is a feminine thing to do. And you can be taking care of kids, and you can do basically whatever you want to do. And obviously the same for girls, because a lot of girls don't even know that they can do all of those things, because those are kind of boyish things that boys are doing. Boys are playing with trucks, and girls are playing with, with dolls. Girls are wearing pink, and boys are wearing blue. And I think that's something that we really need to remove from our society. I know that a lot of people are gonna agree with me. But I think, all this kind of gender differences, we really need to kind of minimize that. I mean, we're in 2020 now. Women can do everything, men can do everything. It's not about women being more empathetic. I don't think that's correct. People are empathetic and people are less empathetic, and that's it. I have a wonderful partner who is way more empathetic than me, and he's a man, yeah. And that's fine. And I earn more than double than him, and we're both very much okay with that, because we have a really good relationship, and we're both coming from places, from houses that taught us that it's not about the gender. You have a dream and go and achieve this dream, and that's it. And I'm very much career driven. And again, because I wanted to prove myself to others, to my family, and also to myself. So this is kind of the path that I'm taking. But other people don't have to take it. And I think also it's important for us not to expect men to take all the responsibility of, of bringing the bread to the table. If men want to, you know, want to take a parental leave because they have a new baby, they should be allowed to do that. And a lot of companies are not allowing men to do that as well. So I think just talking about empathy, it's really about being empathetic to everyone and improving our culture, improving our society to allow everyone to do whatever they want.
Empathy is always a good place to start. You know, being empathetic means understanding one another and asking questions like, if I were in their shoes, would I think this is unfair? What would I want if I was in that position? Or what could they possibly experiencing that I'm not, you know? As designers, we use empathy to solve problems for our projects when we're trying to understand our users. And I think in that same sense that we can use empathy to solve problems within our workspace to understand each other as well. And yes, I do think empathy should be taught to children and not just the ones that are interested in design. Empathy is such a good characteristic to have, to listen to one another and be aware of each other's emotions and be curious about other people's experiences that's not their own, and be honest about our own feelings. And I think overall, those are great traits to have in general.
I think where I would start with this is like what empathy actually is. And I think it's important to, we've had a couple of, I think both T and Lital touched on it, but I think it's important to recognize that empathy has become buzzwordified recently. It's definitely a thing now that you talk about at design conferences, and we talk about it as being a quality of designers that we want. And I think to some extent it's been watered down, and the meaning of it is getting lost, and it's getting turned into a business word. And I don't think that is a good future for empathy as a concept. I think sometimes we do confuse empathy with just general emotional intelligence or emotional labor. But really fundamentally, empathy is, you know, putting yourself in, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and deeply understand their problems. And typically the way that we build empathy is through research. And we do that because we know to design a good solution, as T just said, we need to really understand the problem. So, you know, if we talk about empathy being taught to children in that way, I think what we're really talking about is problem solving, and problem solving using data, and that data is understanding people's emotions or people's experiences. So yes, I think you know, children should be taught that, but also I would echo what Lital said. I think, you know, I think there is a kind of grassroots version of this where we teach it to children, and I think there is also a change the system version of this where we teach it to business leaders, and we really you know, look at it from the top down and not just approach, you know, I don't think there is a kind of silver bullet solution that if we teach empathy to more kids that we're going to change the inequality in this situation. But I do think that one thing that is probably necessary is to kind of elevate it to a business level skill. I think it still is swimming in the realms of soft skills at the moment, and I don't think that does it any favors. I do think, just to address the question about whether women are more empathetic than men, I don't think biologically we are more empathetic than men, but I do think that there is something to recognize that socially women are conditioned to look after other people's emotional needs, whether that's something that's modeled in the family or your school teachers or whatever it is. You know, unfortunately, we are still living in that world, and I think, you know, that is also seen in the amount of emotional labor that women do, both at home and in the workplace. And I think on top of that, women are kind of more likely to sacrifice, we've talked about this in pay as well, sacrifice their own needs to please others or to smooth over situations. And I think, look, to be honest, all of that for me is an expression of empathy. It's really, you know, women are hyper attuned because they have to be, like, as a survival mechanism to emotions and emotional dynamics. And I think I think that is a skill that I think we should leverage, and I think we should, you know, campaign for. But I agree that it shouldn't be something that we, you know, it's like a defense mechanism is not necessarily like the best reason to have a certain behavior. So I think a more equal world would hopefully generate a situation where other people have these skills as well. And I think we're getting there, but you know, at the moment, I think teaching it to kids could help. I think there's a lot of other things that could help, like men doing more of the early child rearing and playing different roles in families and things like that. I think that will help as well.
I think everything's been really well articulated. There's not really a huge amount that I would want to add, apart from just maybe reiterating what I said just before in kind of the earlier question, which is empathy is definitely hugely important, because as we've talked about, it's putting yourself in another's position and having the ability to understand that. I think there's also an element of understanding our biases and why we think the way that we think, and why we have these assumptions about people in the first place, and why we have to then go and, you know, initially empathize is because we've potentially, you know, been brought up in a different way or have been socially trained to think a certain way. So I think there's a lot there, which then I think also leads into around the fact whether we should be teaching empathy in schools. And again, reiterating what everyone said here so well, absolutely, definitely. But when we're teaching empathy, we need to be really careful, because children, when they're born, they're not racist, they're not sexist, they're not prejudiced. They're taught those things. And as teachers, and we, you know, we're probably the generation that will be teaching them, we already have these biases that we've talked about. We already have these stereotypes ingrained in us. So we have to be really careful when we're teaching empathy, that we're teaching empathy in a very neutral, equal way, and not bringing in our own biases, which is where I think maybe we need to go one level higher and retrain our brains slightly before teaching empathy, or at the same time as teaching empathy potentially.